Why is it that sometimes finishing a painting can be even harder than starting one? Maybe it's because closer we get to the end, more we fear ruining what's already good. Confident marks creates paintings that are alive and full of energy. I'm going to teach you a strategy that recognizes that tipping point where adding more no longer helps, but actually taking a step back completes the work. These concepts are deeply rooted in art fundamentals and deal with ideas like balancing your activity areas and rest areas, as well as visual unity, and lastly, of course, emotional resolution. So how do we do that? We sit down in front of a blank canvas, we have our reference material in front of us. I believe that there is a direct correlation with respects to quality of your artwork and the questions you ask yourself as you paint. First, I'll list all the questions here for you, and then we'll address each one through this oil and cold wax demo. The first question is, does my design feel balanced and intentional? The second question is, are my light and dark relationships clear enough? The third question deals with color and asks, does my color support the overall mood? The fourth question is, are my marks confident and purposeful? And lastly, the fifth question is, does my painting still communicate what I wanted it in the beginning? Welcome back for another demo. It's good to have you along again. So for this piece, I am again working with cold wax and oil. However, this time it's on canvas and not on my usual dye bond or a gator board or a wooden panel. So it's a bit of a shift from my usual panels. The reason for that is I wanted to see if the tooth of the canvas would dictate some of the marks. And to an extent, it was a bit of a surprise. The design for this particular piece is relatively straightforward. It's a two-figure composition, both placed on the left side of a vertical format. This is, in fact, officially the largest painting that I've done here on YouTube. It's about 30 inches by 24 inches. And let me tell you, the overall size difference definitely impacts the amount of work with regards to the video, the editing, and everything else. Now, the balance itself, the design with the figures on the left, or I should say the imbalance, is very much intentional. So I wanted the overall space on the right to do some of the emotional heavy lifting. I want it to be left-leaning composition with some design cues on the right to balance that as well. And I'll get to that as we paint here. When I was planning this design out, I thought less about literal placement and more about how the shapes relate to one another. This speaks to our first point that deals with composition and design and asks, does my design feel balanced and intentional? When we think about things like composition, it's not just about filling space. It's usually about creating a rhythm that guides the viewer's eyes. A painting can feel, I guess, off, even if everything is technically correct. So, follow-up question to this design question could be, do the forms interact in a way that feels visually pleasing or alive? Or are certain areas just busy for the sake of being busy, or do they serve a purpose? This reflection helps you step back, like I am doing right there. I'm panning up and down to see the whole painting, and to see whether your painting is communicating what you intended to do. So these fundamentals, these design fundamentals of a painting should be corrected directly at this beginning stage. And if usually you don't do that now, the painting will likely fall flat. Okay, so I think I did an okay job laying out just the general idea as to where I want the darks and lights of this painting to go. Again, this is just, as I said, a general guideline. I
may and often do deviate from these, but usually with these ones, you want to see how the painting flows just within the bounds of where it's presented. So what I've done here is I've got two figures. One I'm kind of leaning towards one another, and even though the hairs are separate, I've kind of lumped their hair into this one big mask here, and I've kind of connected it across the top part of this painting. And I've also added these visual cues, these darks, that may or may not appear or may not stay at the final stage. With regards to the dress, I don't even know. I think this might even be just one big mass of dark, which will kind of balance the top part as I paint along. I still don't know how much rendering I'm going to do. Very likely a whole lot with the face, and then I'm going to go into the unknown, into the abstract with the body and the skin, and as I said, this dress. But as I said, this initial stage, just lay out the darks and lights and see if the overall painting has a certain flow that you're content with, and then get started with laying out those nice colors. So let's go to that stage now.
Before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's firstly deal with the second point, or the second question we ask ourselves in this video series on finishing a painting, and that is, are the lights and dark relationships clear enough? And this is directly in relations to the value structure of the painting. Value is the backbone essentially of a painting, what gives form and weight, depth in a certain direction, and I guess it goes kind of in lockstep with composition and design. Even if the next point, color, is beautiful, if the lights and darks aren't working together, the painting can feel flat or sometimes confusing, really. So a follow-up question to your question on value structure can be, can you immediately read the shapes and hierarchy of forms? Is there variance of shapes? Are they too similar? Does the eye know where to rest and when to move? All of these things will dictate some of the structures of lights and darks within your painting. So checking your value structure helps ensure the painting communicates the design clearly, even before you think about color or detail, which we'll get to in a moment. I'm not a big fan of rules per se when it comes to painting or artwork in general, except of course if you're working with oils. Keeping the whole fat over lean idea is probably very prudent. However, another rule, and it's worth mentioning in this section, is to keep your lights and darks separate, and particularly in this stage, so you can clearly see the relationships forming and avoiding muddying the design too early. So this way the overall structure of your painting stays strong, and you can make intentional choices as you build subsequent layers and texture.
All right, so I've laid out some initial indications of color, constantly asking myself, are these marks intentional or are they random? Now, the one thing with this particular painting that I didn't account for is that this substrate, which is in fact lightly applied or lightly prepared, I should say, cotton canvas, is much more absorbent than I would like it to be.
Paul Cézanne is famous for saying, color is the keyboard, the eyes are the harmonies, and the soul is the piano with many strings. For our third question, with respects to assessing whether a painting is completed, we ask, do my colors support the overall mood and achieve color harmony? Color isn't just decoration, it sets the tone and feeling of your painting. Even subtle shifts in hue, temperature, or saturation can completely change how a piece reads. When assessing your own work, ask yourself if the colors you've chosen are working together or competing for attention, and that can be achieved many different ways with regards to creating harmony. Also, are they reinforcing the mood that you want, whatever mood that may be, calmness, tension, a certain warmth or coolness? So checking color harmony early, especially at this stage, ensures that every layer, subsequent layer, every mark contributes to the emotional impact rather than distracting from it. As indicated, I've laid out some cues of color on the right of their head as well as on their body, just to give me some guidance as to the family of relationships of colors that I will be laying out subsequently or throughout this painting. You'll notice as well that I'm using my usual tools. A lot of you that are returning viewers find these no secret. This is a squeegee brush. It's a small one. I've used, as I said, in this particular demo, a large palette knife. These tools, as opposed to brushes, allow much crisper of a note of color to be laid down, because you can clean them perfectly after every stroke and not be slowed down, especially if you are quote unquote in art creating zone. Let me come in close here and show you what I've done thus far with these color notes of mine. I am modeling the faces as they are the focal point. This direct color application method that I have, these notes of color that I apply, has a certain vitality and directness to it. Every time you start blending and fussing around with oil paint, I think the painting loses a bit of its backbone. So in these initial layers of the paint, both for the background and the face, I will definitely bring it much more to a completion, likely tomorrow. You want to add interest, you want to add intrigue, you want to play around with edges. This particular surface is a bit more absorbent than I'd like, but I'm staying with that initial note and design. The darkness of their hairs and the background will remain that, and then I'll work my way down with more interest and more intrigue. Okay, so day 2 working on this piece. I have to say I'm quite happy with a lot of the marks that I made yesterday on it. Today we're going to be asking certain questions. So number 3 in our how to finish a painting deals with brushwork and surfaces. And I'll be asking questions like, are my textures consistent with the mood of the piece? And maybe, am I just adding marks to keep busy, quote unquote, or do they strengthen the overall form? I'll have to, of course, do a whole lot more work on the gesture and the body and, of course, the dress, and see where this takes us today. Sometimes I'll let the tool skip lightly across the surface, leaving broken, unpredictable textures like this brush is doing right here. It feels kind of freeing and alive, almost like the painting is breathing on its own. Other times, and you may notice that throughout this demo, I'll show certain control. I'll certainly slow down my movement on my arm and use the brush delicately, letting the paint whisper rather than, as it's doing here, skipping and shouting, I guess. The 4th question in our "Is my painting finished?" video deals with brushwork and mark making specifically, and it asks, are my marks confident and purposeful? Mark making is where the real personality of a painting lives, I think. The way you apply paint, whether it's with a brush, knife, or even the edge of a piece of paper or a paper towel, as I've done before on this channel, tells as much of the story as the subject itself. Confident mark making doesn't necessarily mean bold or aggressive. It just simply means that each stroke has intention behind it. The goal is to avoid, I think, stiffness, that over-controlled look that sometimes and often actually flattens energy. When your marks carry rhythm and variation, some fast, some slow, some thick, some thin, the painting starts to move on its own. And that sense of movement is often what separates something that looks painted from something that feels much more alive. Sometimes I apply the most delicate, precise brushstrokes, building subtle details and control, while other times I let a palette knife skip or scratch across the surface or add texture and energy. This is partly why I love and I gravitate towards cold wax and oil quite often. The fifth question in our series deals with emotional or conceptual impact. And it is, does my painting still communicate what I wanted it to initially? This is the point in the process where we have to step back, sometimes literally, and ask ourselves why we started painting in the first place. It's very easy, trust me, to get lost in the details, fixing edges, adjusting values, fine-tuning color. But when you're close to finishing, as I am here, the technical side should start to serve the emotional or the conceptual goal and not overpower it. So at this stage, all the previous questions we had thus far, composition and design, value relationships, color harmony that sets the mood, and of course the mark making, they should all come together to create a certain rhythm and energy to make your painting feel much more human. So when you ask yourself if the painting still communicates what you wanted, you're not just evaluating how it looks, you're checking if it feels how you wanted it to feel from the beginning. Does it still kind of carry the spark that made you want to paint it in the first place? Or did you over-polish and spark away that process? What you see me doing now is applying that background in what seems like a monotonous background gray. It's actually a whole lot of different colors that are within the same family that sort of are visually blended to be that one color in the background, and it's this negative space that gives this painting and most of my painting certain harmony. I talked about this in the beginning. This balance of activity and rest area within your painting is very important because negative space is just as important as painted forms themselves. It actually what gives the work room to breathe. You'll find that if every inch of your surface is filled with marks or details, the eye has basically nowhere to rest and the painting can start to feel noisy or overworked. These what I call pauses in the composition not only make the busy sections feel more dynamic, but also helps the viewer's attention flow naturally through the painting. In a sense, negative space is kind of the silence that makes the music of your brushwork possible. And even though in this dress, what it reads as a dress for this girl in the front, is very much flattened out, it plays a vital role in the overall composition and in leading the eye towards the main focal point, which is their faces. Sometimes I'll add these notes of color, bit of a higher chroma, to add interest, visual interest to certain sections that need it, like this bottom right of this painting.
Okay, so as I get close to completing this painting, I think there is something missing on the left side to balance some of these color cues that I've introduced throughout this painting. So these color notes that I've added, I think a certain something needs to be added to this left side to balance. So this whole left side, I'm thinking of adding a color to balance some of the colors that I've introduced here on the right. So here goes nothing. Let's see how this goes. That's it. Pretty easy, right? Well, sometimes maybe not. Just a final reminder that these points, these questions that we talked about, aren't necessarily rules per se, more like a reminder of sorts to keep your artwork honest in many ways. And lastly, I think the number one thing that I can convey is with any artwork, always step away from your work, not only during the painting session, but afterwards. So when you deem a painting completed, keep it away from yourself, some corner of your studio or somewhere else entirely. Come back to it a day or two later and see if your overall points of concern, the 5 questions we raised here, are still honest and ring true. Let's see what this painting looks like up close.